Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Power Dialogue. Today, we're going to be discussing bankable power, structuring projects that deliver energy access and financial returns. With me, I have a team of experts, industry leaders, and I'd like them to introduce themselves. Well, firstly, let me introduce myself. My name is Omosade Imohe. I am an energy and climate expert, and I would be the moderator for today. So let me start by allowing Mr. Edu Okeke to introduce himself and tell us what his experience is and how it's relevant to the discussion for today.
Thank you. Project. It's get one detail projects. It's good to look at.
Thank you. Over to you, Sadiq Waka. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Sadiq Wanka is my name. Special Advisor to the President on Power Infrastructure in the Office of the Vice President. A lot of the work we do today really is geared towards how do we better position the sector to attract private capital. And in my previous life, working in consulting, we've done a lot of work mobilizing capital for mega infrastructure projects for across Africa, really. And so I think this is the kind of experience we're trying to bring to government and also to this conversation.
Thank you. Over to you, Suleiman.
Yeah, thank you, Mosade. Good evening, everyone. My name is Suleiman Babamanu. I am the Program Director for RMI in Nigeria and co-lead our Africa Energy Program at RMI. RMI is an international energy transition nonprofit. We have been operating in Nigeria 2017. And I think the relevance here for us is we have supported decentralized energy solutions, both on the side of interconnected mini-grids, embedded generation, and isolated mini-grids in Nigeria across the value chain. And bankability of projects, I think, is something that we constantly, discuss. And so it's relevant, it's important for us as we talk about scale. So it's a pleasure to be here and looking forward to a fruitful conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introductions. So I want to get started with the questions. So Mr. Edu, you said Azura is the only bankable project in Nigeria.
Well, in the past sector,
in the past sector, sorry.
That would not like to.
Okay, so let me start with the first question that goes to you. So many projects in Nigeria are technically viable but commercially fragile. From your experience running a successful IPP, what would you say the most underestimated commercial risks that developers must address early if a project is to remain bankable?
That's interesting and tricky, I must confess. Now, I'm an engineer, so I think one of the biggest challenges we have is just thinking of projects engineering-wise. I remember when I used to be in the cement industry, and there will always be that talk between the sales guys and the engineering guys. Engineering guys always feel we are more important than the sales guys, because if we don't produce the product, then the company will collapse. But what they never realize is if you produce the product and nobody buys it, the company will collapse. So we tend to focus more on cables, transformers, and wires in the power industry, nothing on money. Let's understand that every major infrastructure project you have anywhere in the world, once you've built it, if you don't have customers that are going to pay to cover the cost and the returns, but most importantly, the cost of building that project, that's already a stranded asset. That's it. The project is gone. And the same time, for customers to trust, and I mean, when you think of power, for customers to trust you that over the next 20 20, 30 years, then they will rely on that infrastructure. They also want to look at, upstream, how you are gonna generate that power. So to say, for example, the fuel, if it's a gas produced power plant, somebody's gonna ask, do you have enough gas to last that? Because if you don't, that's also problematic. But I think we focus so much on the power plant itself without thinking of the customers. And let's take, if you look at history, that's what we tried to break. 2010, 2014, where we said, how do we ensure that such projects come? Most investors and developers were not ready to commit because they were not sure of how to collect their money. And that was why government came and said, we are going to guarantee, because we are going to put policies in place to ensure that these codes, who are actually, they are the direct line to money, because everything is about money. These codes are the direct line to money. So government said, okay, these codes are not ready. Nobody was ready to commit to building such a project looking at the disputes. So government said, we are going to work with the disputes to get them to that level where people can look at them and say, I'm ready to commit this fund. But if that myself as government will step in, unfortunately, all of us can enterprise taking can come in. And that's cleaning up of the discourse so that discourse will take over their responsibility developmentalized. And that's the challenge we have to take. So for bankability, it has to go back to the source of money. Until that source of money is sorted out, until there is a mechanism to ensure that either the district to collect enough to pay for the generation of electricity, for the gas used in generating that electricity, for everything down the chain. Until that is done, the project will not be bankable. Nobody, no lender will give money, because if you go to any lender, that's what they're asking themselves. If I lend you money, how am I sure that you are going to pay me back this loan interest? So bankability of any project still revolves around money. It's about flow of money. And the problem we've had in the power sector in Nigeria is that for a very long time, we've always looked at it in terms of, we have the transmission line from Wedge to Market or something like that, which is not what it is. Where are the load centers? Those places where we are putting the load centers, and customers there are able to pay. Those are the conversations we should be having. We, for each disco, what is their collection rate for each of their products? And we have collection is very high, say 100%. What are we doing to make sure that we keep serving those places so that they keep collecting money? We are not looking at it that way. So it becomes like a social commodity. If everybody served, then no one is really served very well. We have to look at it economically again. If we want everyone to serve equally, then government will have to put his balance sheet on the line. Because that's the way it works. And you have government puts his balance sheet on the line so that everybody, whether those that can pay and those that cannot pay, are served. Or you leave it to the market, and the market is going to discriminate. It is going to look at and say, who is ready to pay me? That's the person I'm going to start. We have one success story in this country, and that's the telecom industry. Everybody talks about it. It has done very well. Why? Because they discriminated when MTN and they connected Glow came in. They did not roll out everywhere. They went to where people were ready to pay. Lagos, Abuja, Otago. They collected money, and then as they make money from those areas, they kept expanding. In the power sector, we are saying you cannot discriminate. If you cannot discriminate, then unfortunately, government balance sheet has come into. Right.
Thank you very much, sir. I think you made a very interesting point. So we focus so much on the assets, what's the gap, but we're not following the money. And we need to do that because that's what investors are interested in. Because in the end, when they put their money in, they need to know how it's going to come back. So hopefully we put that in perspective as we plan, Nigeria's grid expansion. I wonder if it's, if you say it's similar in the distributed energy space. So from that segment, Nigeria has been successful We have successful pilots across mini grids, CNI, solar, and hybrid system, yet replication at scale remains slow. From the systems and markets design perspective, what structural gaps must be addressed to unlock large-scale deployment?
Yeah, thank you very much. No, it was very interesting listening to you speak as it relates to product bankability. As an engineer, there's a saying that Ohm's law is Ohm's law anywhere in the world, right? So mini grid is not a technology problem. It's really around, the revenue assurance, right? Truly at PMI, we have sort of worked handheld both developers and discos in deploying decentralized energy solutions in Nigeria. When you talk about these different business models, you've asked about mini grids, which can either be an interconnected mini grid or an isolated mini grid. And then you spoke about CNI as well. These are completely different categories of customers, if you think about it. The point you made around, willingness and ability to pay, for example, it's a case of a CNI, project where you either have one customer or a cluster of predominantly commercial and industrial customers where you're able to, assess their spending on diesel or any kind of fuel that they're using. And so you're able to also estimate what kind of savings they want to make. And so that begins to tell you what bankability looks like in terms of a CNI customer. It's completely different from an isolated mini grid, where you're dealing with customers that have never, in some cases, used electricity. And so the approach there would be completely different. And of course, when you're talking about an interconnected mini grid where you have a combination of, some commercial customers and residential customers with willingness and ability to pay. Now, I think there's a differentiation that needs to happen, when we talk about energy access and reliability. And that's, are we dealing with a social problem? Are we approaching it from a social intervention standpoint, or are we approaching it from a commercial investment standpoint? And they're different. A commercial investment, as we know very well, the KPIs are what is the return on investment, right? Compared to a social investment intervention where you're looking at poverty reduction, energy access, and things like that. So, and we have relied heavily on subsidies, especially for early stage kind of projects in mini grids and interconnected mini grids, but the country is gradually shifted towards commercial investment. I just wanted to put this perspective just so that we know, like, there's a difference between the different business models or customer types as we speak about decentralized solutions. In terms of the gaps that need to be closed structurally, I think, first of all, and you spoke about it a little bit, is how do we design and execute projects? That's on from the project preparation and planning standpoint, right? Bankability for, it can be, it's different for different people. For the developer, what he defines as a bankable project might not be the same as what a financier sees as a bankable project. So whether it's an interconnected mini grid or an isolated mini grid, for an interconnected mini grid, you need to co-design it with the disco, right? Select feeders that are, to a certain extent, have reduced amount of demand for network infrastructure upgrades, some supply that goes there that helps to minimize your cost of investment as it relates to battery systems. You also need to look at how you're optimizing your cost and financial structure of these projects, because as much as possible, if we're talking about scale, then it means that you have demonstrated from a pilot that these projects are both bankable and profitable, right? And so you need to optimize that. I think sometimes developers play different roles all at the same time. They are EPC, they are O&M, they are everything. And I think at some point we need to be able to capitalize on well-experienced EPCs and O&M companies that are able to execute projects at pace and can reduce sort of cost overruns. The country has done a lot in the regulatory space. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a gap. It's just more around understanding, exactly what benefits can be driven from that. There's call for increasing capacity of a mini grid from 1 megawatt to, but has the customer base justified, that increase? Are you able to find communities that can consume up to 5 or 10 megawatts as an interconnected mini grid or isolated mini grid? I think there are a few communities that have that potential. So that clarity is also very useful. I think lastly, is really around the workforce and capacity building, both on the side of the developers as well as the utilities. Particularly as it relates to my first point on isolated mini grids, how projects have been designed. If you design a project with an estimation of the demand is just going to naturally come without actually looking at the, this is like financing is a supply side. You need to look at the demand side interventions like productive use of electricity and things like that, and design project with the intention to help to stimulate demands, especially for isolated mini grids. And then for the discos, I know you've worked with a disco, the management changes sometimes. It's a very, very big issue. So you need to institutionalize, these interventions internally to be able to sustain, the scale of decentralized solutions in the country. And maybe lastly, just on the infrastructural side, there's a lot of public fund that needs to go into distribution network upgrades, both the distribution and the transmission, so that it reduces the amount of investment from the private sector side to deal with the generation. Some of the transmission bottlenecks, and I know you know this very well, but the amount of power we're generating, supersedes our transmission capacity and then our distribution capacity as well. So these are some of the things that needs to be addressed to be able to go from pilots, to scale.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So you mentioned project preparation. I think that's really key in helping projects to become bankable, because the investors say there's funds, and then there's people say they don't have funds, but then the investors are looking for bankable projects, right? So if there could be some kind of support to help this project become bankable so that investors and the project developers are aligned, I think that should help. And then you also talked about capacity, because and I think we encountered it also doing a number of projects. The scale that we need to grow, do we have that capacity at the developer level or even at the disco level? Yeah. So, like you said, maybe more established companies need to come in to do the EPC and the O&M, and then maybe we can start to see those projects happen at scale. But then we also said Nigeria has done a lot on the regulatory side, and I think that is true. But Sadiq, I wanted to ask you whether there was any specific policy or market barriers that must be addressed to enable these models to achieve the level of replication needed for meaningful energy access expansion.
And thank you so very much. And I think I resonate a lot with what I've been said so far. I think maybe three things I would mention, right? I think one is there seems to be this forced dichotomy that we're forcing the country around off-grid versus on-grid. And especially in the context like solar, CNI that, we've mentioned, if there's a cluster of customers that need power, why are we automatically thinking of them going upgrade through solar? Can we think more holistically around what is the best way to serve them, right? That could be transmission upgrades, that could be having embedded generation, right? And more, definitely as much as possible, I would say, run away from the isolated systems, right? That we seem to be promoting at the moment. So I think that's one. I think just that holistic view to start with. I think the second thing is really around financing, which has been spoken about a lot today, right? Because at the end of the day, what you want is the scale in this financing. And what are the things that are needed for that? You know, you need to really support a lot of projects to do their project development so that they have something to present to these financiers, right? We've seen models, especially in the upgrade space, that, you know, this viability gap funding, where projects that aren't maybe sub-commercial, you know, can be supported with some concessionary loan that the government takes, you know, that would support that, them becoming bankable to the financier. I do think that we need to expand that, you know, beyond solar mini grids that we're doing, you know, into transmission and other aspects, you know, distribution as well, right? I'm glad to note that, you know, these days the regulator at the national level is increasingly thinking around independent transmission projects, right? And how do you attract those? You know, they're definitely going to be corridors where they're sub-commercial, but with some viability, that funding that you provide upfront, you know, you can bring those to fruition. So maybe those are the key points I would say that we need.
Thank you. And you raised an interesting point, and there's always a debate of grid or grid, but I guess Nigeria, we do not have the luxury of choosing one, right? We have to find a way to, you know, look at them both holistically to serve, to improve energy access. And right, that for a project, we immediately start to think, oh, let's go off grid, but that weakens our grid system. So we need to look more holistically to see what is needed for each cluster as opposed to solar just seems to be the what's involved now. And of course, there's a lot of government support there. So I guess there's a lot of interest. But yeah.
And for those of us that are trying to support the grid and trying to see it, right? Like, we don't act fast enough, then
yes,
we can do the independent solar.
Yeah. Thank you for those questions. So for your responses, sorry. So now we're going to talk more about innovative financing and de-risking mechanisms to attract sustainable private and institutional investments. So I think I'll start with Sadiq. So development finance institutions offer partial risk guarantees, political risk insurance, and liquidity facilities. How can Nigeria effectively integrate these tools into national investment frameworks to provide developers with predictable long-term risk mitigation options?
I think maybe the first thing to highlight is really just financial sector reform, right? And a lot of it is ongoing. There are lots of good things, you know, that are happening. Because ultimately, you know, there are pools of capital, you know, typically outside the country that we're trying to attract. And, you know, your small developer in Nigeria does not necessarily have the tools to be able to do that, right? So they need a bridge. And the bridge, I believe, are our own financial institutions locally. Right? I think you often hear the joke that, you know, people that have bank accounts outside the country, you know, they don't experience all these bank charges and all of these things.
Yeah.
That's because the banks are in the business of lending, right? But in Nigeria, you know, we need to, you know, again, through regulatory interventions, some of which are ongoing, you know, from the bank recapitalization and others, to really push banks to start lending and to start really spending their time identifying and financing projects. So I think that's really one on the financial sector side of things. And then secondly, you know, it's just the early stage preparation, you know, so Iman was saying earlier. At the end of the day, many of these projects, you know, they're just concepts, right, to some of these financiers. So really getting them, and it's really minimal. You're talking about 5 to 10% of the project value extending or at least making some of the facilities ready so that people can package these projects that can then attract, other lenders and financiers. And then thirdly, I think is just to mention the fact that we just need coordination for the scale, right? Because there are lots of people that have pockets of projects, 1 megawatt, 2 megawatts, 5 megawatts. But then, you go to even an AFDB or somebody of that scale. And if you're not talking 50 megawatts and above, you're kind of wasting the time. So how do you coordinate better amongst many of these smaller projects so that you're packaging them together and taking them to financiers and then, enjoying some of those economies of scale? So those three things is probably what I would do.
Thank you. So certainly we need to aggregate this project so that we can attract the right type of investments. Suleiman, over to you. So as Nigeria balances energy access, affordability, and decarbonization, what transition pathways should the country prioritize to ensure that reliability is not compromised while still attracting climate and transition finance?
Yeah, thank you, Musade. I think, we have been in exploring energy transition in Nigeria since when the energy transition plan was launched. Would that be in 2022, I believe? And we have set ourselves targets of net zero by 2050. And looking at all of the different sectors. So specifically talking about electricity, I don't think, first of all, that the sector is responding to the transition plan, right? In a way that, the transition plan itself, I'm sorry to say this, has come under criticism in terms of some of the numbers, but that's not the subject right now. But I think, from where we are sitting right now, when we look at distributed energy resources, in terms of pathways, first of all, the idea is not for Nigeria to go 100% renewables overnight. I don't think we would ever be able to do that. We are a gas-endowed country, and we have to utilize gas as a transition fuel, right? With discipline. What can we be able to achieve for us to fully industrialize, while mixing that with the opportunities for renewable energy to play a key role, especially around, some of these mini grids, last mile, access and things like that. For distributed energy resources, you can use that to reduce the pressure on the distribution network or even the transmission. For locations where you're able to improve the distribution network infrastructure and improve on the generation on site, you're able to address the access gap and then improve that reliability, and it frees up some energy to be utilized in other places. For you to fully sort of appreciate transition from a sector standpoint, you need to modernize. Both on the transmission and the distribution, especially as it relates to distribution network. Utility digitization is very, very key. You cannot afford to manually manage the entire distribution network without, you won't be able to cut down all of the commercial and technical losses that you're looking at. If you're not digitizing, if you're not sort of adopting smart technologies that allows you to manage the grid efficiently. Now, if you combine that with the inclusion of decentralized solutions, it also reduces the amount of diesel that customers are using, or petrol, and that also helps to cut down the amount of emissions that you're dealing with, in the long run. Of course, we spoke about finance. Figures in the energy transition plan are, very, very scary when you look at, all of the different things that Nigeria has to deal with and the amount of income that we're looking at. So it's very important we look at creative blended financing solutions that would help to, finance gradually an aggregation of, well-prepared project pipelines that would then be able to incrementally grow over a period of time. So where do you pull in private capital? Where do you pull in public capital? And where does subsidies and grants play a role in helping to, one, bridge affordability gap and help to prepare projects for bankability?
Thank you. And thanks for reminding us that Nigeria is gas endowed.
I said that deliberately.
To make him happy. Okay, so over to you, sir. Cost escalation, delays, and procurement risks undermine project viability. In your experience, what execution strategies have proven most effective in keeping large-scale power projects on schedule and within budget in Nigeria's operating environment?
It seems like that Azura is probably the only major project done in this part of the world that was finished ahead of schedule and below budget, which we are very proud of.
Another first.
Going to them, this is more like throwing something. It's very important when we talk about project banking. You talk about credit enhancements, and the thing is, whenever we talk of credit enhancements like TLG or something like that, people get jittery in terms of what does it mean. There is one particular thing that we don't talk about a lot, and that is policy consistency. Because that's actually what is driving the PLGs and everything. What is PLG? PLG is simply that somebody has said, Nigeria, or let's take it back. If the market is good enough, you don't need to incentivize me to come in. Developers will be all over the world putting themselves to develop a project.
Yeah.
But then, or the market is not good enough, the government wants to attract investments. What happens? Government will say, okay, I am going to do A, B, C, D. And they might boardrooms, people will be looking at, oh yes, the government does A, B, C, D. That's a good market to it. But how are we sure that government will do A, B, C? As we have all these credit enhancements coming, whereby government is saying, I'm going to do A, B, C, D. And you as an investor, you say, how am I sure? Government will say, okay, I'm putting this credit enhancement. If I do it, it doesn't materialize. Yeah. It's only when I don't do it. So let's understand that what the government needs to do, regulators, is that policy consistency. So that I can develop my project, build it without thinking of talking to anybody in government. That's the thing. Some industries are very good, like some industries that you don't need government support. For example, I want to do meat pie. That's funny. But I'm looking at, okay, this area, if I do meat pie, do I have enough customers to buy it from me? That's very simple. But if it's not like that, then government should just be thinking, what are the policies I need to put in place to ensure that when developers come, they can do that project. Now I'll now go back to them.
Yeah.
When we were about to do Azura, we looked across the region. It's not just about Nigeria, but to say, how do you do such a massive project and not have cost overruns? All those things. And I tell you that contractors and EPC contractors not change others. You say, hey, things just change. And you look at it and let's understand, people, I don't know how Azura was developed. It was cool. Of course, we are scrutinized by and they looked at our cost, querying up the things to say, what is a prudent operator going to do? As a prudent operator, I expect you to do this at this cost. So what it meant, and it was project finance, so the lenders also scrutinized everything. What it meant was any cost overrun will be borne by who? Shareholders and point out. So we needed to get it right, because there is no other way. We are never gonna, because we have a cost overrun, we're never gonna go back to the end to say, hey, adjust our tariff because we all of a sudden I thought I didn't arrive on time. Siemens or gave us another bill of $4 million. MBET will not listen to us. So it was a big, and we identify, I mean, it was a big session for us where we say, how do we make sure that we get it right? And there were two things. One, we looked at the projects that we had, the NIPP project. They were the major projects that were done there. And what was happening? There were questions. OEM will say, I've shipped this container. EPC contractor will say, when that container arrived, there was one boat that was not there. And they will spend 2-3 weeks writing email on the boat. That's those are the things that will lead to cost changes at the end of the day. You say, how do we avoid this? You said, okay, OEM, whoever is going to be OEM, must have joint and several liability EPC contract. So if that boat doesn't arrive, we don't care because if something goes wrong, both of you are liable. That's the very first one. And that made some OEMs actually drop out to say, sorry, we are not ready to do projects in Nigeria. So only those that were ready to do projects in Nigeria and stick their neck out, joint and several liability. And at the end of the day, Siemens was selected, but then Siemens also knew that the local environment, as much as they are very good in terms of building power plants, they don't know how to manage logistics in Nigeria. And they said, we needed a partner. We recommended Geosbect because JBL, you all know it. JBL is one company, even government, I mean, when the chiefs are down, you need this road, there's only one company you call immediately and say, get it delivered. So we now said JBL will come and do the civil work and all the local logistics because they know how to get something from, say, Lagos to Maiduguri. When it's there. But at the same time, again, they still have to be inside that joint and several like they never, I mean, I'll tell you that I tried to resolve a lot of issues between them because there were so many challenges they had, but we never cared. It's joint and several like but everybody knows that we don't do all this part. The ship is on the line. Whether it was caused by Siemens in Nigeria, Siemens in Germany, JBM, your balance sheet is on the line. So that helped a lot, And the second one was transparency with the project. So we developed a tool whereby every morning we issue a morning report of what happened at site the day before. It was a big fight with the EPC contractor because they were like, no, you don't have to tell me what we are doing. Don't care. Our job is to tell everybody what is happening. So if you every day, if you make a mistake, everybody will know that you made a mistake. This was happening. We were very transparent issue, and this morning report was going all over. I mean, the funny thing, even the VP then, Oshpende was the VP. He was so surprised receiving the morning report from Azura. The Edo State Governor Adams Sherman was there. We were broadcasting it all over the place. And I tell you, because we also know some of the challenges with doing some things. Something arrives at the port, you've paid all the duty, the customs officer goes down. But there is also something we've learned among Nigerians. Nobody cares, and it's very unfortunate, but that's how we are. Nobody cares if something breaks down. They just don't want to be the one that is blamed for it.
Yeah. The responsibility.
So, if a file is here, I don't care if it moves. But I just want to make sure that when they say, why haven't this file moved? It's not my name that comes up. So let me push it to the next guy, then I don't care. And that's what it was. So, for example, if a container arrives, our report comes out, which the port command guy is also receiving, saying this container has been a report for the past 1 week. He'll be asking his team, this report I'm getting, please get it out. The postman or navigator to so get doing it. And my team, but it was something that worked for us. The community, local community, we know It is in Niger Delta. We know how it is, the executive. Initially, we went and sat down with all the chiefs, the elders, and the leaders, and negotiated with them. What does it mean to build this power? Okay, we agreed on some things like unskilled labor, they must come from the local community. Established. Now, in terms of materials to be used, something like sand, they will be provided by contractors from the local community. You know, you have those agreements, and it was signed and sealed. You understand? So that's why we built the whole thing, and we're not shut down by the local community, you know, because everybody knew what was being expected. And they got it. So you don't want to start and then somebody now comes and stops work. You know, this thing might seem, when you talk about it, they seem like, oh, they are common. No, they are very common. It worked for us. And when such a major project is planned, we plan all these things. We sat down, thought of all those eventualities and said, how do we minimize those eventualities? And like I said, we are to finish that project 8 months ahead of schedule, below budget. It's actually when we finished that we realized that some of our lenders had a team that they had in place that when you have a problem, the team that will come in, you know, sort out the problem. They were hearing the project is finished. The plant has been tested. It's all working, you know. And
you don't have the team.
Can't be such a thing in Africa. Yeah. But also a conversation somebody had, you know, like one of the stakeholders we had then, the MD then said, somebody came to the office say, because we had one of the foundations for one of the top activity 12 then. Apparently when they were mixing the concrete for casting that, the chemical, the additive that was supposed to put in the concrete, they didn't know that it wasn't working, you know. So it put more than, so at the end of the 7 days, it never killed. Okay. You know, and they had to remove the whole foundation again and start afresh. And what the stakeholders said, one of the employees came and said, you know, Asura, that their foundation for GT12 fell. The MD said, really, keep quiet. The MD is coming today. Let me know if he's going to mention it. And the guy said, no, they put it in the money report. And like the contractor, they were very surprised that we could even
be that transparent.
Yes, yeah. That mistake is not a bad game. It's simply people trying to understand that you have to be transparent. And people trusted us. Even the local community, they trusted. So when they were getting that, whatever is happening outside, this is what everybody's doing. It brought that comfort, confidence in everything we did. And yes, like I told one of the SSD president at some point said, this is actually something we can export, that Nigerians can do a project, because it's also very important. Of all people that work at our sites, 98% of them were Nigerians. Wow. It's also very important because we don't talk about it a lot. You know, yes, we have some experts, but 98%. And Azura is managed 100% by Nigerians, and we supervise that project. So it's also very important to know that we Nigerians can do this kind of major project if we belong.
Thank you very much, sir. So I've taken notes for when I'm building my life. Our plans. Transparency is key, but then, you know, we talked about the type of companies. So, you know, you had large companies that were able to absorb these joints and said, oh, liability. The small companies can't absorb that with their balance sheet. So they will be missing from sort of projects. Yeah. So thank you for sharing some light on that. Thank you. Okay, so I'm conscious of time, so we'll move on quickly to our next question or set of questions. So we want to explore opportunities for blended finance and public-private partnerships as instruments to mobilize capital for both on-grid and off-grid projects. So Suleiman, beyond supply-side capital, how critical are demand-side solutions such as load aggregation, customer credit enhancements, and anchor load models in improving project bankability and accelerating private sector participation?
Yeah, thank you very much, Omosedi. And just before I go into that, I wish many of our projects in Nigeria are managed that way with transparency and We've had a mini grid project that was completed, and Sadiq was part of that, was about in about 6 months or less than that, while we had some projects that has gone for 5 years. So, and it's always, one story or the other. I'm not going to name names for somebody, but it's just a clear case of maybe transporting one equipment from Lagos to Abuja that is to Kano that is taking 3 or 4 weeks or even months to actually, because they've been paid and nobody cares, nobody's taking accountability. So that's a very good point. So back to your question, I think very quickly, and conscious of time, supply side capital alone will not scale the market. And the example you gave about telecoms is a good example of where there's the demand has grown, even beyond the supply, and that's why you're able to see the rapid scale in that sector. Demand, sort of deliberate demand creation, is what will force a scale in the market. And so some of the points you made around load aggregation is very, very critical. How are you aggregating MSMEs, industrial clusters or commercial clusters, to ensure that these are set of customers that have one ability to absorb whatever commodity you're selling, in this case electrons, and can actually pay for it. This is so, for example, in some of the urban or peri-urban locations, productive use become very, very important in rural communities. If you go, in all transparency, if you go to many of the mini grids that have been developed today, what you would find is that there is low capacity utilization. And that's because, either the project was designed with the expectation that the demand is going to grow, or the design of the project was built over the capacity of what the demand is in that community, and nothing has been done. So what we have done at RMI in supporting these types of projects is actually to stimulate that demand. We concluded a project called Energizing Agriculture project, where we brought together energy and ag, businesses to respond to one, helping to grow the economies of these communities by adding value to what they're producing, and helping to also make mini grids commercially viable by bringing in energy efficient appliances that would, suck up the load. I think also when you think about anchor load models, and this is where you talk about like telecom towers, right? Like processing plants in locations. These are some of the anchor loads that you should be designing your project around primarily, and then look at what other secondary demands you would be addressing from the residentials. That way you're assured of your revenue and you're assured of your offtake, which is very, very critical to projects like this.
Thank you, Suleiman. And great work that RMI has done, and I hope we continue to see more of those and see scaled projects, so we don't have the very
actually on the Energizing Agriculture, we have a scale up program right now that is called Energizing Women and Youth in Agri-Food Systems. This is alongside, we're doing this with partners like MasterCard Foundation and the Global Energy Alliance.
Okay.
And it's just started to roll out as a scale to the Energizing Agriculture project.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to move to Mr. Edu Keke. Weakening offtake creditworthiness is one of Nigeria's most significant barriers. What revenue assurance structures or contractual innovations would give private developers enough confidence to commit capital even before systemic reforms take hold?
Yeah, it's tough, but I'm one of those, and I know some industry players not like this. And what we have today, maybe one or two tweets actually work. The biggest challenge we have is still that the entity responsible for collecting money is not investing in collecting that money. It's very important. And, you know, we have all these these are not paying, but you know, I said something, think of it. Go and build a petrol station tomorrow, or build any petrol station in Nigeria with a uniform. Right, then fill your car and say, I want to drive out. The reality.
Yeah.
This goes, and that was the promise made there. This goes are supposed to invest to be able to collect money. You do not collect money, you have to make investment to do it. So the credit enhancements, we are supposed to provide a backup pending DISCOs doing the right thing. But what we have in the DISCO space is that money has not really entered there. Let's start with the privatization. Privatization was not DISCOs issuing shares and investors subscribe so that if I buy a DISCO for say $100 million, that $100 million stay in DISCO. No, it was government selling shares of $100 million to the bank. I walked away. So DISCO was left with nothing. Listen, so now the guy that paid the price of money to buy the DISCO gave the money to government that put the money in his pocket. And the guy actually borrowed for that money. So now to invest, everybody was thinking, I'm going to only make money out of what I bought.
The existing structure.
That's why some DISCO facilities today still have ECN logo, Electricity Company of Nigeria. I believe that almost 80% of the watching us today were not even born when electricity So it still boils down to investing and going into the DISCO. Again, I'll refer to the telecom industry. MTN bought their license probably for $285 million or something like that, but they actually invested more than $500 million before the first call was made on the end. So we have to go back, you know, because otherwise we are going to continue government credit worthiness, however we look at it, the guarantees, we're going to go back to where we are.
Yeah.
Everybody, there's a big brother. As long as that big brother is picking up the tab, nobody cares about whether company is working or not. That's where we are right today. 2.8 trillion, 6 trillion, keep going about. But something has to happen. I believe that governments, especially now, we have a very big window. I don't want to talk about credit enhancement. I don't know. We have a very big window where the president has basically allowed the issue, clearing of the backlog. Let's use that as an opportunity and not allow that backlog to build up again. Now, that backlog, we are paying the GenCos. There is one clear thing. That's a debt that DISCOs did not pay. That's why we are doing the GenCos. Let's use this opportunity to also say, DISCOs, that debt that is in your book, will wipe it. Then you have, just like the banks are doing today, you have 1 year from now to capitalize that DISCO to say $500 million, because that's the biggest credit worthiness. That each of the DISCOs have like $500 million equity that they can use to actually improve their network, to put more power so that power will flow to people. Because why are people not paying? They don't trust that they will get power when they need it.
And they know they can bypass and
I know that if the guy says I'm getting power for 12 hours, I'll get that 12 hours, and I know the 12 hours.
Yeah.
So we have to use this opportunity of clearing the debt for the GenCos to also clear the balance sheet of DISCOs and force them to increase their capitalization so that they can invest in their network and improve access for people. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I totally align with you because I had this conversation with someone a few days ago that if the DISCOs don't capitalize, then we're just going to go back in the same cycle. So absolutely. I have a question from the audience. I'll just read it out and then see who can answer it. So it says, not overlooking the current challenges,
the Nigerian power sector. Practical steps must be taken to achieve 100% nationwide electricity access. Looking at countries like China and India, with much larger populations, what have they done right, and what specific lessons can Nigeria adopt to achieve nationwide power access? Who wants to take that?
Honestly, I think, at the end of the day, it seems like a very Herculean task, but is it really rocket science? We have hashed out what the issues are, even in this conversation. We know what the range of solutions are. And so specifically, right, at the end of the day, if you want power, you have to pay for it, and the investors have to be able to recover their money. Some of the ways that needs to happen is you need to have a functioning electricity market, right? So us in government have to step out of the way as far as tariffs are concerned. Government wants to subsidize a portion of the market, because they're vulnerable, because they're poorer households. Then that has to be done in a way that does not affect the timeliness of payments to market participants.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I think that's part of what is in the works now, right? What is the new subsidy regime that should look like that is essentially, allows cost-reflective tariffs, but then also gives support to vulnerable households. The second thing is what my senior brother Edu mentioned, right? Just around, strengthening governance amongst licensees, and in particular the distribution companies, right? There has to be consequences for not delivering, service levels that you promised, right? You need to be able to invest. Clearly, yes, there's work that needs to be done on the government side to support the discos, because quite frankly, these discos have changed hands. So we should not completely continue to blame current set of disco owners, for some of the problems with the set of buyers for some of these, because most of them have changed hands. So how do we clean the slate in a way for many of them, but then hold them, rigorously accountable going forward? So I think if we do some of these things, right, and then the third thing, like we mentioned earlier, is this holistic approach, right? I think we just need to be constantly thinking around where are the pockets where we're going to deliver power, at the right, the right cost that people would be able to pay for. Blur some of these lines between off-grid and on-grid, anchor as much as possible around those customers that can pay. And hopefully then we'll begin to see, some of these, both financing and also project developers coming into the picture more and more.
Thank you. So maybe I'll just write on that question. If everything aligns well, how long do you think it can take us to achieve 100% energy access in Nigeria?
I don't even know how to begin to answer that. There have been some work, obviously led by REA, saying, targeting 2030, as early as 2030 to close the electrification gap.
Okay.
Most people think that's too ambitious. So you say 2035, 2040, that's probably the more reasonable range if we start getting our acts together today.
Okay. Thank you. There's actually a question for you, last question. It says Nigeria has had mixed outcomes with public-private partnerships. What institutional bottlenecks is the presidency addressing to ensure PPP projects are delivered faster, more transparently, and with better risk allocation?
So maybe three quick things, right? Because I know there's a time area. So the first thing that is happening is, ICRC sought presidential approval to lift, to ease some of the regulatory process for approving PPPs. So now PPPs at a parastatal level, ministry level below, I think 20 billion there. Do not need to go to the Federal Executive Council. I think it's 10 billion for parastatals. So that obviously streamlines the process for participants. The second thing that is happening is, again, you might have seen earlier this month an announcement from the Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning, trying to collaborate more with signing an agreement with IFC for project preparation for PPPs. Because I think there's a strong realization across government that we keep going, having these international trips, right? Trying to see financing. But when they ask you where the projects are, you give them an Excel sheet, that, or, a pager, Word document. No, that's not really what they want, right? And so bridging that gap between what we think are projects and what financiers consider to be projects. And then maybe the last thing is, I think there's quite a bit of work currently happening in terms of strengthening the institutional framework for PPPs, right? I think there's still a lot of confusion in the market regarding the role of different players. Take BPE, take ICRC, take MOFI, where do they overlap? Where does, the role of one agency stop and the other begin? So these are all causing confusions. In the middle of that, you have, Ministry of Finance doing things, you have Ministry of Budget doing things. So I think there's a holistic approach that is needed. And I know the National Council on Privatization has also, instructed the Attorney General of the Federation to look at ways of streamlining some of these institutional bottlenecks. So maybe those three things are still there.
Thank you. So we're now on to recommendations, and some of those your question was to identify 3 immediate policy actions. I think you've kind of touched on that. So maybe I'll just move on to Mr. Edu Okeke, engineer doctor, who doesn't want to refer to as that. Global investors remain cautious about Nigeria. Signals or structural features do investors now prioritize when assessing whether to fund a Nigerian power project, and how can developers better position themselves to meet these expectations?
We do talk to lenders from time to time. We do investors. One thing for sure is that we actually lifted the biggest law, which is forex. Let's understand that this administration comes from the well. Forex was a very, because you wouldn't have somebody to bring money in where he wasn't sure how he was gonna
take it out. Yeah.
So we started well. There are still some things that are needed. I'm talking of the economy. We started well, we are doing very well actually. You can now see all of a sudden, rather than appreciation, we are talking of appreciation of the currency, which is about confidence. Then we get to the power sector. Yes, power sector, there are still developers that are out there. There needs to be a coherent strategy. We need to know the policy direction. As at now, we look at the power sector as a sector in transition. We now have the Act of 2023 that places power with states. States, how are they going to regulate? Let's also understand that that's challenging. I was one of those that actually had issues with electricity simply because if you take away Lagos State, most states cannot take like 500 megawatts power plant for their states. And let's understand, based on the infrastructure we have today, doesn't no state, other states, just based on the infrastructure we have today to dispute that 500 megawatts, most states do not have that. And if you put it like that, let's understand that the bigger the power, the cheaper it is. And that's why when we say something like Azura is expensive, I said, why if Azura is expensive, you should have seen a lot of embedded power, 30, 40 megawatts. They are not going to count because they're more expensive than a 460 megawatts power plant. That's the reality. So as states have smaller power plants, it will impact the cost. And that's also what we never know. I would have probably preferred that to still be regulating the generation and transmission, but then distribution can be rolled out to states who are actually best placed to actually look at the price. That's the law. That's the law. We have to live with it. I look at it that investors are still studying that, and until all states have their laws, it's still very difficult because for example, if I want to do a power plant in today, I have to be thinking of Edo State, but also that part might also flow into Ondo State, to Delta State. What are the laws in those countries? Those are the things. So investment has to studying the law as it is, and also looking at what states are doing. Those are the things that you have that clarity. Like I've always said, it's about policy consistency.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Do you have any closing remarks or good? Okay.
At the end of the day, it's when I also let's understand that how not different from any other product that we all consume.
Yeah.
It's not free. There is always a price. I mean, the unfortunate thing is that a lot of people look at power, you can call it social, you can call it whatever, but there is no free lunch anywhere in the world. So when you know that if I go and buy a cup of rice, I have to pay, you also have to think if I use electricity, I have to pay. So power is an expensive commodity. And until we have a mindset that and pay for electricity, we start thinking, all of us as Nigerians, start thinking of stable electricity for all of us.
Thank you very much, sir. Suleiman, over to you. If Nigeria is to become a consistently bankable power market over the next decade, what market reforms, data transparency improvements, or planning tools should be prioritized to unlock domestic and international capital? And you can just throw in your closing remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, I know we're over time. No, I think some of the recommendations have already been spoken about, especially, what engineer doctor you mentioned. Yeah, and I started to talk about it earlier about we should stop seeing energy as, for some reason we still have that mindset that it's supposed to be free or something like that. It is not, and unless we change that mindset, we're not going to. Utilities have a very big role to play here in terms of the amount of investment that they would need. And sometimes I ask myself, should government continue to hold a percentage share of these utilities? And maybe that's a subject for another day. But we've seen how the noise that the band A big tariffs have cost, but people are still paying. Is it still cost reflective? Right? But we need to be able to get to that stage. Data transparency is very, very key. If you're designing a project alongside the utility, you need to be able to identify the feeder. I don't understand what supply is going to that feeder, so that it helps you determine the amount of investment you're making in that. As a country, I think there's a lot of planning tools that have been that are out there, and I don't think we're fully utilizing it. Both from the side of the government, Ministry of Power, and other development partners have done quite a bit of work in developing planning tools. I think integrated resource planning is actually very, very key to support the states build their capacity, understand their market, and from a national standpoint, how we approach this. I think really if we are to fully achieve electrification in this country, I think one thing Sadiq refused to mention is we need to have a serious political will and accountability. A lot of funding is still being pumped into the sector, and if it's actually been used meaningfully, I think there's a lot of progress that we can see in the sector. But yeah, I think a lot has been done. A lot has been said here. We're still doing God's work, and I think there's positives to continue to support the sector than there are negatives.
Thank you very much. For your time, for your responses. I've certainly learned a lot. And I want to also close by reminding us how we started. Mr. Edu Okeke said we need to focus on the money. We need to follow the money, right? Because even these things that we've discussed, the question came on 100% electricity access. that's like starting at the end, right? Who's going to, can they afford to pay for it? And if they can't, of course, the government can step in, but someone has to pay for it because we're now talking about what makes these projects bankable. And in bankable projects, there has to be someone that's going to pay for it. And I think something else that, we also learned that Nigeria has done relatively well with some regulatory environment, but there needs to be policy certainty. So, and Sadiq also mentioned some of the things that the government is doing in terms of coordination. We have the FX stabilization, so that is great as well. Transparency. I think I like what Azura did in terms of transparency because that makes people accountable. Like you said, right now there's a lot of money going in, but show how it's been spent, so if we have that level of transparency and accountability, maybe that forces people to do things differently. So I'd like to thank you all for your time this evening. Thank you for making this conversation very interesting and for giving us a lot of things to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.